Thank you. Please be seated. So here we are, once again, every 3 years, it rolls around this proper 20, as it's called in the liturgical language, and we get to Luke chapter 16, the parable of this dishonest servant and dishonest manager, and the preacher goes, oh no, not again. This is not my favorite passage to preach on. Why couldn't we go? Here a couple weeks ago, we did the parable of the lost sheep and the lost coin. And of course, we skip over the parable of the lost son, the prodigal son, as it's called. We do that in Lenten time. But I said, those will preach, right? Those will preach. How do you preach about this passage, which Jesus at the end of it says that the manager praises him for his shrewdness? When was the last time that you considered shrewdness a virtue? And yet Jesus seems to talk about shrewdness as a virtue. So here we are. The preacher is faced with it, so we have to tackle it, right? We have to try to figure out what's going on in this passage. Of course, it's all set in this context of wealth and money and what matters. Our passage out of Amos is one of the prophets that denounced the rich. You probably heard it in there, that little passage that went by that talked about make the ephah smaller and the shekel greater. Make the ephah smaller and the shekel greater. What does that mean? Well, you live with it every day. Anybody gone to buy a bottle of detergent lately? You know how the bottle of detergent seems to have gotten smaller, but the price of the bottle of detergent seems to have gotten greater? That is making the ephah smaller. Ephah is a measure of grain, by the way. The ephah has gotten smaller, and the shekel has gotten greater, right? And so somebody's making a lot of money after your much smaller bottle of detergent. You have less, and they have more, right? And of course, this goes on all the time. It goes on all the time, and that's partly what our passage is about today. We have a manager who's being called to accounts. He's being called to accounts. The owner, the rich man, has heard something. He's gotten rumors are coming back that the manager is cooking the books, most likely. And he says, you can't be my manager anymore. You're being called to account. I want to see the books. Show me what's going on. And so the manager says, what am I going to do? He says, I'm not strong enough to dig, mainly because he's probably thinking to himself, yeah, that's beneath me to dig. You know, we think today, everybody says, but nobody wants to work anymore. It's as old as the Bible. Right? Nobody wants to work anymore. Nobody wants to do those dirty jobs, right? But it's as old as the Bible. It's nothing new. It's always happened. I'm not strong enough to dig. And I'm too proud to beg, but I'm not too proud to cheat my boss. So he decides he's going to basically cheat his boss. So what he does is he takes the books and he goes to all the debtors. And the goal here is that it's if I scratch your back, maybe you'll scratch mine situation. If I help you out, you help me out. That's his hope, at least. So he goes to the first debtor and says, how much do you owe to my master? And he says, 100 gallons, we'll call them, of olive oil. He says, sit down and make it 50. Now, exactly what is going on here, we don't know. It could be that this was sort of an interest deal. It was against the law in Israel to charge interest on money, on coinage. But oftentimes, you made it up in kind by charging more or less for barter goods, things like oil and grain, because that wasn't against the law, so you'd find ways to make a little extra. So it could be that the manager is just saying, we're going to write off the interest. Or it's possible also that this is some sort of markup that the manager was doing, where he was getting his cut, sort of his commission. He says, you go into the car salesman and says, I'll tell you what, I'm going to not take my commission. Yeah, right. We've all heard that one, right? No offense to any car salesmen out there, but, we live through that. So we've lived through those kinds of things. They're as old as the Bible. But however this transaction happens, the goal for the manager is that somehow if he ingratiates himself, makes friends with these other people by discounting the price, however it happens, he himself will be welcomed into other people's homes, or they'll give him some sort of job. Why you would hire a dishonest person, I don't know, but that's his hope, that that is going to happen. Now the twist to this story is that Jesus has the rich man praising the dishonest manager. Not so much praising him because he's now been cheated out of his money somehow, because now if he goes back and says, oh, no, that wasn't the deal. But remember, he says, write down, this is what I owe. So I said, well, this is what it says it owes right here, and now you're going back on this deal. So the rich man's kind of caught in place. So all he can do is sit back and says, well, you dirty so-and-so, that was pretty smart. I'm not happy, but he praises him for being shrewd. Now, the real twist in the tale of this story is Jesus says that the people of this world are much wiser than the children of the light, in that they will do whatever it takes to get what they want. What does it take to get what you want? They will ingratiate themselves. They will make friends with other people in order that they might be received and welcomed. Now, brothers and sisters, this goes on all the time as well in our modern times. It happens with politicians. Now, let me just give you an example, a modern example. You've probably heard about the Biden plan to forgive student debt. Have you heard of this? A few of you are nodding. Yes, you've heard of this. So the plan is for people making below a certain amount will get up to $10,000 of student debt relieved. If you have another kind of loan, particularly for low-income people, it could be an additional $10,000. Now, it doesn't really matter what you think about this plan. Now, truth in advertising here, I have 3 children paying on student loans and they don't meet the threshold. So yeah, my children will benefit from this if it actually goes through. And by the way, the Bible talks a lot about debt forgiveness. God help us if we ever had a year of Jubilee and all debt in the country was wiped out. I don't know what would happen. The economy would probably crash because we're built on collecting interest and things. But the Bible has an interest. The psalm today talked about lifting the poor and needy from the dust. It has an interest in taking care of the poor. But it doesn't really matter about what you think about this plan. What is the practical effect, political effect? It is no different than the shrewd man saying, let's write off some debt here so that you will be my friend. Let's face it, this is a political move. It was a promise made, apart from the merits, and it may have merits. I'm not arguing whether it does or does not. It may very well have merits. But it is a political move so that hopefully you will vote for me in the fall. Now, unless you think that the Democrats are the only ones that does it, the Republicans just do it a different way. They just give tax breaks to the real rich people. So everybody does it, right? It's the way the system works. Again, it's as old as the Bible. Well, for us, though, the question is, how can we be shrewd? How can we be shrewd? How can we make friends for God? How can we make friends so that people will say, oh, I would like to be a part of you. You're my friend. Politicians know how to do it. Business people know how to do it. We need to be shrewd as well. And one of the things that always amazes me is why a church would want to turn off entire segments of population. Why would we want to say, we don't like you? And let me talk about it in the political realm here. We heard from 1 Timothy, Paul giving instructions to 1 Timothy that says, I command that supplications, thanksgivings, intercessions, prayers of all kinds be offered for kings, rulers, those in authority. Now, in Paul's context, that makes sense. It was actually a Jewish context. Because when Rome conquered Judea and conquered the Jewish people, They would have loved to have the Jewish people say, okay, time to pray to the emperor because the emperor is God, and they wanted the Jews to pray to the emperor. But of course, that was just rebellion time. We're not going to pray to the emperor. So the middle ground that came was, I'll tell you what, if you won't pray to the emperor as God, will you at least pray for the emperor? And Christians picked up that same idea. We will pray for the emperor. And the goal for Paul and for Timothy was all to the point that we might live quiet and peaceable lives in dignity and godliness. In other words, leave us alone. Don't bother us. Let us live our lives in worship in peace. And yet we, in much of the church, are constantly at war. We try to go on sides of culture wars and demonize other people. I have heard it said in many churches that when a certain person is president, we're not going to mention that person's by name, right? But I think that is going against what Paul is actually saying. Now, that doesn't mean we have to agree with everything. Believe me. Most politicians, there's a lot I find to disagree with. Do you find a lot to disagree with politicians? A lot of you do, I'm sure. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't pray for them. Pray that they will have wisdom, pray that they will have strength, pray that they will somehow align with the purposes of the gospel wherever possible, and ultimately that they will leave us alone to live in peace and worship as we can in this nation in freedom and godliness and dignity. Thanks be to God that is the case. But we should not be making enemies of people instead. I love what Bishop John Taylor, our bishop, talks about. He says, look, I've got friends, and oftentimes, if you ever follow Bishop John on Facebook, he sometimes butts heads with people a little bit. And he definitely lays it on the line with what he thinks about certain things. He says, but if you have that person that you vehemently disagree with on politics, instead of saying, you're an idiot, you're far better to say, you know what, I know we disagree with you, but can we just sit down and have a coffee? Tell me what you think about this. I may not agree with you, but you're my friend and I want to listen to you. And there's far too little of that going on in the world today. We need to listen to one another, and above all, pray for one another. With supplications and intercessions and thanksgiving. Thanks be to God, we still live in a nation where we can worship in godliness and dignity. Amen? We are able to do that. Or amen for you, buddy. So thank God we were able to do that. That's what we were able to do. And then we need to use our wealth. Use what God has entrusted to us for the benefit of others. I mentioned a moment ago how God cares about the poor and those who are needy, to expand our circle of influence. Thanks be to God for St. Francis that cares about those who are in need. Gail was telling me they had a great weekend this past weekend down at St. Luke's. Lots of people from St. Francis here on Friday night helping prepare food, feeding people. But they could always use more. She told me just this morning, the one big thing they need are men's pants. Not dress pants so much. Here's the other thing. I'm always amazed when, people give things. It's like, why would you give that ratty old thing that you don't want, that's so nasty you would never wear it, right? And you think, I'm going to give it to some poor person because they'll just take anything. Don't they deserve dignity and respect as well? So I would say if you're going to root through your closet, I hear men's sizes waist 32 through 38.
Okay. Smaller and larger also, but they really need those middle sizes.
32 through 38. 32 to 38 are the big sizes that they need. But any size is fine. But I would suggest if you root through your closet, now I know, if you're a young 16-year-old girl, you wear those pants that have all the holes in them. I get it, I don't understand it myself, but that's it. So, but yeah. So men, if you go through your closet and say, you know, I've got a pair of slacks here, especially Dockers, jeans, those kinds of things. Those are the things I really need. And you say, yeah, I could pass on this. I could give this away. I bought a pair of slacks recently where I bought them and they were just not quite the right length. They were just a little too short, and I wore them a couple times and then they shrank more. And I said, it's time to just let them go. But they're practically brand new. Don't just give your worst things, give of your best. Because all people deserve dignity. And that's a great thing, so that we can expand our circle of influence, and make a difference in our community. And we can probably even think of other things that we could do. What are all of us going to do with what God has entrusted to us? God has entrusted worldly wealth. And none of it is our own. God gave it to us, and the Lord is going to take it away. All of us owe a great debt, first of all, to Jesus Christ. Going back to our passage in 1 Timothy, what does it say? There is one mediator between God and man, and Jesus Christ gave himself as a ransom for all. What is a ransom? Somebody's kidnapped, right? Someone's held hostage. And we pay a ransom. We pay a certain amount so that that person may be set free. All of us were in bondage to sin, captured and bound by Satan's wiles and schemes. But Jesus Christ paid the ransom through his death and resurrection. And we are set free, and we owe him our all. We owe him our all. And so I ask you, brothers and sisters, the manager was called to account. Open the books, let's see how you're doing. And it was found that he was not treating his master fairly. If the great master called you and said, we're going to open the books and see how you're doing, what answer would you be able to give? Of your wealth, your time, your talent? Because you cannot serve God in wealth. And Jesus paid the ransom for us all. So let us consider how to expand our circle of friends, how to welcome others into our community, and how we will use what has been entrusted to us.